Testing 1, 2. Can everyone hear me? Good morning, and thank you for being here at 9:35 on a Saturday morning. I realize it was a long Friday night for a lot of people. Welcome to the Silwerskermfees in discussion with the master. Our master this morning, I feel, is particularly relevant to the industry because Foreman, who is going to come and talk to you for a little bit, has overseen many productions from script development to screen. As South African filmmakers, that's something we can relate to. We deal with small teams, we deal with limited resources, and we do the best we can. But today we have someone who's done that on Oscar-winning films, including Hurt Locker, Dallas Buyers Club, and most recently Colossal. So without going into too much detail, I'd like to welcome and please give a hearty applause to Foreman.
Good morning, everybody. First off, I should thank the Silwerskerm Festival, which I hope I pronounced okay, kykNET, and the people at Idea Candy who have been extremely nice to me since I've gotten here. So, I've had a really great opportunity to talk to a lot of people since I've been here, some of whom I see in the audience and some of whom I haven't, and that's been really nice over the last couple days because it's kind of given me a good perspective about you guys, hopefully, which will allow me to speak somewhat intelligently, maybe. I'm going to do the whole presentation in English. I hope that's okay. My Afrikaanse is getting better, but it's not so good at the moment. But mostly what I want to talk to you guys today is about everything, I'm calling it outside the story. And to me, that just means that from what I've seen here with people, filmmakers, producers, you guys seem to be pretty adept at the actual making the movie part of the process. So what I'm really going to talk about is everything outside of that. I'm going to do it from my perspective, sort of the Hollywood/international perspective. I'm hoping that people here are interested in pushing beyond the borders of South Africa, and I'll get into that a little bit, and hopefully this will be somewhat enlightening. I also hope that you guys will stop me in the middle of my talk to ask me questions, to yell at me about things I'm doing wrong, to have a conversation with me, which will hopefully be informative, rather than me just sitting up here and talking to you the whole time, which is going to be boring for me and for you. So please, I really do encourage you to raise your hand, to stop me, to sort of ask questions and challenge me, even if you think what I'm saying doesn't actually make any sense. So we'll start there. This is a picture I found on the internet. I think it's really pretty. Pretty sure it's Los Angeles. So I thought I'd bring a little bit of that to you. I don't know if you guys have been there. Maybe some of you have. So anyway, let's get going. The first thing I'm talking about is creating and selecting projects. Now, as a producer, you sort of have two avenues for making movies, right? The first one is to come up with concepts or ideas or find stories or find people, to develop those things from scratch. If you're a writer, you're doing the same thing. If you're a filmmaker writer, you're also doing the same thing. Now, the second way that we make movies is by finding those projects, finding scripts that already exist, projects that already exist, filmmakers that are already attached to things. And in our business, depending on where you sort of sit, those two avenues are kind of provide you with a different path, and we can go through each one. One is more of the sort of producer, financier kind of person. They're the ones kind of gathering these projects for the most part. The others are people that are kind of developing things. We did both, and I encourage people to do both because I think it's healthy, and I think that when you're in the process of creating things from scratch, it aligns you with the creative talent in a way that you don't get necessarily as a financier. And I've done it from both sides, and I've found it to be much more rewarding to be on the creative path. However, there are reasons why we do it the other way. And that gets into my first piece here. So when we're doing these projects and we're figuring out what we want to make, the first question I think everybody should be asking is, why are we making this, right? It's a pretty simple question, but I think it's really important, and it kind of starts you on the path to like the movie itself and on the creative path to where you're going to go. So why are we making this? People make movies for lots of different reasons, right? People make movies because they have a personal issue and it's a catharsis for them to get out whatever it is they want to talk about. People make movies because there's a political cause or a certain group of people that they want to tell a story about because they want to expose something. And people make movies because they want to make money. Newsflash. It's a business, right? It's one of those beautiful businesses that we get to make and do things for many different reasons. And if we're lucky, maybe we get to make a living at it too. This is a really important question. And it's something that I think everybody should ask themselves before they even start, whether it's before they start developing a project, an idea, or whether it's when they read a script and they go, why am I making this? This kind of leads into the next question. Who are we making this movie for, right? If you don't know who you're making the movie for, you should think about whether you should be making the movie, right? Now, these two things are very related. If you're making the movie to make money, then you probably shouldn't be making the movie for a subset of people that isn't very large, generally, right? If you're making the movie to expose something about your country, then the target might be people in your country. And that sort of question of who are we making the movie for is interesting. Now, this also goes into two things. It's not just about the audiences who are watching the movie. Sometimes it's about the people that might be buying your movie or distributing your movie. And understanding those people and what they're looking for is really important. And again, these are two questions that you should be asking probably before you even start, right? It should inform the type of project that you're making from the creative side, if you're interested in, you know, accessing whatever it is that you've decided, like why you're making it, obviously. Third thing, how are we making it? Again, all these things are very interconnected, right? So, assuming that you're making a project to, you know, show the world about a political cause, and you're making it for the people in your country because that's the thing that's most interesting to you, well, how are you making it? Well, from talking to people here, I've learned that like a lot of the films, the shorts here, and things are, you know, or some of the local filmmaking, the Afrikaanse sort of filmmaking world here, you get a lot of, let's say, money from governmental sources, right? And those sources are given to you because of particular genres that you're creating, types of stories you're telling, things of that nature. So, assuming that that's your path, let's say, if you're asking the question, how are we making it, right? Your path is, well, I'm gonna make it because I'm gonna get the money from this sort of thing, and that's gonna dictate the type of movie I'm making, right? And why I'm making it, and who I'm making it for, because I'm only gonna be making it for people here. That's fine. That's a great version. Now, if you wanna make a movie that's gonna make $100 million in the US, and you know, you want it to be a 4-quadrant movie, like that a giant studio is gonna distribute, well, then probably you're not gonna get the money to do that from your local government, right? So, we'll go into the other process of how we're making this, but to me, these things are the most important questions to ask in the beginning. It will dictate exactly where you're going with your movie, how you're gonna get there, and also it's gonna dictate a little bit the content and the creative content involved in that movie. So to me, like, these questions are just fundamental before we even start a project, and we'll get into sort of the specifics about that. And lastly, yes, of course, it's great. So this is a little bit of a joke, but it's sort of not, which is, this business is really tough, as we all know. And if you don't think it's great, you probably shouldn't be doing it. It's just like, the bar is too high, and it's only getting harder. I mean, that's the truth. Like, on the international market, things are tougher and tougher. Not to dissuade any of you, but that's the truth. We used to be able to, like, grab a mediocre script, pay Nick Cage a bunch of money, give him a gun, and run him around and make 20 million bucks. That doesn't happen anymore. So, you know, things are changing, and, you know, maybe for the better. There's an argument that, I don't know what to do with this thing. Anyway, there's an argument that, that we, and when I say we, I mean sort of like the Hollywood movie-making community and the international independent world have actually caused a little bit of our own downfall. And what I mean by that is, we got really good at making movies to make money for ourselves. And what happened when we did that was we delivered a bunch of movies that were actually pretty mediocre onto the international market. And that made a lot of distributors lose a lot of money over the course of time. Now, some of those movies were great, they made a lot of money. A lot of those movies were mediocre, they didn't make a lot of money. And the product of that is a lot of buyers right now across the international space who don't pre-buy movies anymore. And we'll get into how that works in some of the, I'm gonna do some finance talk, so hopefully people aren't super bored about that, but I'm gonna do a little bit of it. But, so for me, what's happening now is a focus on the actual creative quality of movies, which I think is actually really nice and might provide a bit of a rebirth for, you know, what people are talking about original ideas, original content. So this idea of, like, yes, of course it's great is really important. This also will lead me into a little bit of a story about what is great, because the truth is, movies are art, and I don't think we should forget that. It's a business too, but at the end of the day, it's really an artistic product. And that means that they're subjective, you know? We have critics for that reason. You might like a movie, the person next to you might hate the movie. They're all subjective, based on your own experiences, based on, you know, whatever, based on your focus. Me personally, I like plot-driven movies. So movies that have no plot, for me, are much less interesting. Other people, you know, think beautiful movies are great, and whatever, whatever. So I'll give you a really good example of this, which is, when Hurt Locker was finished, it was screened at the Toronto Film Festival. I think it was 2009, if I'm not mistaken. For every single buyer in the world, okay? That's every studio, that's every foreign buyer, basically in the same screening. People walked out of that screening, and one distributor in the United States made an offer for that movie, okay? It was Summit, who eventually distributed the movie. They offered a certain amount of money, which I will not say. Then they found out no one else made an offer for the movie, and they reduced that offer by about $1 million. The movie that you saw, hopefully, if some of you saw it, in the theater, was about 20 seconds shorter than the cut that we screened. That's all they changed, about 20 seconds of the movie. Went on to win Best Picture. Whether it deserved it or not, I don't know. That's an argument we can all have if you want. But at the end of the day, you know, I think most people thought it was a pretty good movie, right? It just goes to show you something, which is, not everyone, probably no one really knows anything, right? I mean, I hate to say this, but this is kind of true. So, you know, you have all of the most professional, most adept, you know, highest level executives in the film business, in Hollywood, in whatever, literally sitting down and watching the movie that went on to win Best Picture. And none of them even bothered, mostly, to make an offer on it. So, it just goes to show that everything's subjective, you know? But you have to think and believe what you're doing is great. And I think we, most of the time, want to, but I think that the bar, I said, is higher than ever. And so if you don't think that, probably you should be maybe switching your focus to work on something that you actually do think is great. So, anyway. So that's kind of my creating and selecting projects pieces. I still haven't seen any questions, which I'm encouraging. But if someone has one, then please.
Hi. I just want to ask how much the kind of franchise concept in American Hollywood, like all the Marvels movies, the Star Wars, the etc., has had the impact as well, additionally to what you're speaking of, on the industry, the independence, the buying, etc.
Yeah. I think it's a really good question. And I think a lot. And the reason is pretty simple, which is those movies make a lot of money and people go and see them. You know, it's still pretty sad, like, if we make a drama and we cut a trailer for it, pretty much nobody is going to go to see that, right? And that's the world we live in. Now, why is that? Well, I don't know. But they used to. They don't really anymore. So as much as everybody runs around, especially in our community, talking about how we want new ideas, we want innovative filmmaking, people vote with their pocketbooks, right? You know? At the end of the day, if only people are going to go see Marvel movies, then they're going to pay tickets for those, and they're not paying tickets for other stuff, then the studios are going to make more and more Marvel movies, right? Because they're businesses with shareholders, and, you know, they need to make money. I think the independent world, what's happened is that the independent distributors all around the world also see this. And some of those independent distributors are connected to the studios, meaning they distribute studios' movies. Here in South Africa, for example, they do as well. Everybody's looking for those sort of studio replacement movies, meaning movies that are probably not as big. They're not $250 million movies, but they're movies that are really commercial. They're movies that sort of hit that sort of core quadrant idea. I personally think that there's a wide opening for other types of movies. Movies that obviously are not made as nearly as large budget, that aren't necessarily four quadrant movies, but movies that have a little bit of a more specific tone and idea. I use like Arrival as a really good example of a movie like that. Brilliant movie, brilliant director, in my mind. Really just a drama, to be completely honest. It's a drama with kind of a big idea. It's a drama with like a really good hook. It's a drama with a good twist that's done really well. It was about a $40 million movie, if I'm not mistaken. Enough to, you know, make it big and get the biggest actors in the world, biggest directors, biggest DPs, but a movie that you don't have to necessarily chase with like $100 million of ad revenue. So I do think there is an opening to your question. I do think it affects people. I think quality always trumps everything else at the end of the day, personally. But it's hard, you know? And it's hard being an independent filmmaker, and it's hard being an up-and-coming filmmaker because you're not going to compete with those types of movies, but you shouldn't try, you know? I mean, you need to sort of, you know, do what you think your movie can speak to you. And I think this goes back maybe even to this question here, which is who are we making this movie for? Which is if you understand where your product is going, why it's going there, you can tailor the other things around it. You know, if you have a subset of people that you know is going to be really passionate about something, well, then you kind of need to work backwards and understand maybe how much that movie should be made for, you know, and what the surrounding kind of objectives are. And when you go to the distributor, you can tell them, like, I understand this is for this group of people, and I understand that it's going to cost this much to access that group of people, and you know, and I'm only spending this much on my movie because I understand all those other things, you know? And I think that kind of conversation is important. And distributors like to hear that, you know? They like to understand that you know exactly where that movie is going. If you tell someone that you are making a movie for everyone, that is not a good answer, just in general, okay? Unless you are making Batman, okay? That's just the truth. So, anyway. Let's see. Anybody else?
Do you mind explaining what you mean with the four-quadrant movie?
Four-quadrant movie. So basically, it's all age groups and male and female, right? So mostly people care about 18 to 29, because generally they're the ones spending the most money. And then just male and female. So you get everyone, basically, you know? That's, you know, kind of the idea. If you're making a movie for kids, then you tend to get adults too because they have to bring them. Action movies tend to skew male, generally. dramas tend to skew female, you know, kind of obvious stuff. But that kind of gives you a target for like where your movie is going and who's going to potentially go see it from an audience perspective, right? So, anyone else? I see somebody back there.
Oh,
Sorry, run quickly.
seriously. Colossal. Who
Yes.
did you make it for,
a really-
and why did you make it?
That's a really good question, actually. It's a really good question. I read that script, and I thought it was the strangest thing I'd ever read, to be completely honest. But there was something really empowering about it. I think it's a movie that actually is sort of target audience is female, and it has a certain male demographic. But I also think that I've found, especially in testing the movie, that there's a little bit of an uncomfortable piece of certain parts of, I don't know how many of you have actually seen the movie, but that makes kind of the male demographic a little uncomfortable in some way. But I like that, personally. Why did I make it? That was a movie that we got within half the way attached already. She had been put together with Nacho, the director, and they had talked about this thing. We came in, we did some work on the script with them, we cast the rest of the movie and went on to make it. There's a financial consideration of a movie like that was a fairly safe, not 100% safe, but a fairly safe kind of build out of doing it. Shot the movie in Canada, access the tax credit there. We did it for a pretty reasonable budget at the time. But mostly I just thought it was super quirky and I loved it. And I just thought it had the ability to stand out and be different.
I do think it was hugely underrated, but the box office was 3 million.
Yep, nothing, right? Did pretty good with the critics, which I always thought we would. Came up with the same number that we came up with internally, which I knew it was gonna kind of go for. But the distributor there is also a new distributor. It was their first movie, and their focus was on creating something that had some brand value behind it, and I thought they actually did a really good job. But it was never a movie that was meant to have a huge box office. We always knew that. You can't make a movie like that. And again, you understand who are we making the movie for. You read the quirkiest script you've ever read, you're not going to expect to get a huge box office. It's just sort of part of the deal. Doesn't mean you don't make it. And that's what I'm saying. This isn't necessarily about making money all the time. It's about whatever reason you think is the right reason to make the movie for. And that's important. So, anybody else? Great. All right. Putting it together. I hope you like my pictures. I like the 80s. Anyway. So I start out with producers. And I say, creating the right team to increase odds of success. Now, what does that mean? Every project has strengths and weaknesses, and the people in it have strengths and weaknesses. And I think you need to be able to identify those and try to fill those weaknesses in the best way you can. Me, I understand some of mine, and when I put projects together, each specific project sometimes requires other people. I think it's good not to have too much of an ego, and understand that sometimes you need to bring on those other people to help you with those projects. Now, there can be different reasons for that. It can be skill sets, it can be political reasons, it can be, all kinds of different things. Sometimes it's just good to bring on a big producer because it's gonna make your life easier. Maybe they have a deal at a studio, Like there are times where, there are producers where you bring on because they have a really good quote, and then you go and share that. It's really nice, But mostly, I think you want to bring together the team that's going to give you the greatest odds of success. And that doesn't mean necessarily doing it all yourself. And I think most of the time, it definitely doesn't mean doing it all yourself. Movies are a collaborative process. It takes a lot of people. It takes a lot of things to go right. It only takes one thing to go wrong. So that's kind of like sort of a daunting idea, but it's true. So the first part, in terms of any movie you're putting together, for me, being a producer, maybe that's my own, there's the ego maybe, is bringing on the right team to help you get that movie made. Now, second, directors. We love them because they're really the captains of the ship. I usually have a conversation with every director that I start to make a movie with. The first thing I say to them is, this is your movie. My job is to support you in your creative vision, and whatever that is. I'm gonna have to put some parameters on that because that's just the way the world works. And I expect only one thing really of you, which is, you have to listen to me, you have to process what I say, you have to think about it, and then you get to make your own decision, and I will support whatever that decision is. And that's kind of the idea that's the way I like to approach filmmaking. It's not everybody's way that they like to approach filmmaking, but it is what I prefer. Directors, there's this thing in the DGA they talk about all the time, which is singular vision, right? That's why they don't usually let people direct in teams, because they want one person's vision for a movie. They do make exceptions to that, but it's hard to actually do, to be honest. So for me, the director is really the cornerstone to the film. This is their movie. This is something that the best directors in the world will come up with ideas and ways of doing things that you would never even think of. And that's really nice to see. It's also really nice when those directors, especially some of the best directors in the world, are collaborative, which they are, which is pretty amazing too. Not all of them are, but a lot of them are, because they understand that a good idea is a good idea. And sometimes it takes two people coming up with a good idea, and then maybe a third idea comes out of that, and that's the one you end up using. So I think that for us, you still need to be deferential, but as a filmmaker, I would encourage you to not be closed, to be open to the people around you, whether it's your producer, your DP, your AD, your mother, whatever, doesn't matter, So somebody said to me something once, it was like, all these people work in all these big companies and make all these big movies and stuff, but at the end of the day, like, the person buying the ticket is just another person. So, like, why is, your assistant's comments about something any less valuable than yours? They're not, right? Or the guy who works at the gas station or whatever, because at the end of the day, like, they're your audience, you need to be receptive to them. So anyway, directors, now in terms of how we put movies together, like I said before, sometimes you have a concept, you decide you're gonna develop that concept, you go and you hire a writer, you go and you hire a director-writer, you go and build the thing from scratch, and away you go. Sometimes director comes to you, says, I have a great idea, help me make it, All those things are super valid, they're all great. We've done movies in all those different ways and try to be open to all of them. I think if you're a writer-director, you tend to want to direct only the things you write, which I understand, but I don't know, I just think you should be open to everything, because sometimes, you can come up with something better than, or help someone out, contribute, create something greater, even if you didn't generate the idea yourself, which is okay, so. Talent. What I mean by talent are actors, generally. Now, I'll go into the way that we kind of do this stuff in Hollywood, or in Los Angeles, or in that kind of stuff, but really the big thing here on the big side is relationships. Relationships is everything, and material. Material can overcome relationships, and relationships can overcome material. So it's kind of two. If you have that great script that we talked about in the beginning, you have a great idea, you have a great project, it will attract great people, I think there's this sort of thought that you need to have, like, a famous writer, and it's still prevalent in the studio world where, like, without a big writer on your project, you're unlikely to get the movie made. In the independent world, I don't think that's really true. I think that material speaks for itself. If you have a great script, you have a great script. Doesn't matter who wrote it, doesn't matter where you came from, doesn't matter what language you speak, doesn't matter anything. Colossal was written by Nacho. It's weird, I said. He wrote it in Spanish, had it translated. By the way, just in case you guys don't write in English, find a really good translator who's also a writer. This is like just a little piece of advice, because a bad translator turns a great script in another language into a bad script in English, just in general. So it makes a huge difference. And like even on that movie, when we did a rewrite, I got the rewrite back, and I called Nacho and I said, I really don't like this. What is going on here? Because this doesn't seem like the rest of the script. I said, do you use the same translator? He said, no. I said, go get it rewritten by the same guy who you hired in the first place. He said, okay. Got the script back. It was great. Just goes to show you. I think it's important. Anyway, so back to talent. So I'll go through a little bit of the process of like how we do this. So here's pretty simple. Assuming you have a great idea, you go and, oh, hold on. I'm going to do my next slide because it'll go there. It'll make more sense. Last thing is representatives. Sorry. So in LA, we have a bunch of agencies, big ones, small ones. You might have heard of them. CAA, WME, UTA, they're all three-letter words. I don't know why, but that's just what it is. For the most of the big ones. And then there's a bunch of management companies. There are big ones and small ones. The difference between agents and managers, maybe I should tell you guys that if you don't know. It's in California, there's something called agency law, which allows you to seek and procure employment for other people on their behalf. There's certain rules associated with doing that. And one of the things agents are not allowed to do is produce. You cannot produce and be an agent at the same time. When you are a manager, this is where you find a lot of agents become managers, because then they can produce. So when you're an agent, you take a percentage of somebody's earnings. When you're a manager, you sort of do that too, but it's a little bit more open. So anyway, that idea of relationships not only is about relationships to the actual talent, it's about relationships to the people who represent the talent. Now, so the big question obviously is like, well, I live in South Africa and I don't know all the agents, so what am I supposed to do, right? Well, that goes back to, I don't know, producers or other people. Again, if you have a great, amazing script that everyone loves and you need to figure out how to attach talent to it, and you need to figure out how to get relationships to the people that represent that talent, then maybe you should try to go find another producer that has the relationships to the talent, as an example. Because maybe that's what you're lacking. You know, I'm a great producer. I know how to make movies at a great budget level. I'm a great director. I have an amazing script, but I just don't have access to the people that I need to. So let's go find the people that have access, and I'm going to add them to my team. I'm not going to have an ego about it, because who cares? It's going to make my movie better. So to me, when we kind of walk through this process, you know, it starts out with something as simple as like, I call somebody I know. I say, hey, I have a really great script. Do you want to read it? If they like you, if they trust you, and if you sent them good material in the past, they say, yeah, no problem. A couple weeks go by, because people do not read fast, by the way. And nothing happens fast. So that's the other thing. Everything takes forever. I don't know if that's true here, but in LA, man, it's like everything takes forever. So hopefully in a couple weeks, maybe in a couple days if you're really lucky, you know, that person reads your script, whether it's an agent, and they say, wow, I really like this. This is really great. What do you want to do with it? And you go, well, I was thinking, you know, XY client of yours might be really great for that. I don't know if I like that idea. You convince them, you know, hopefully, because that's your job. And they're like, all right, well, I'll send it to them and see what they say. So now you have to get an actor to read a script. This takes even longer, generally. For most. Some, not so much. Some, you know, depends. They like it. Now, there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes, right? The agent's sitting there going like, okay, well, do I really want the actor to read this, right? Maybe I'm just going to tell them that they're going to read it. And then I'm going to tell them that they passed, even though I never sent it to them. That happens. Hopefully not, because you have those relationships with those people, so that doesn't happen, but generally can. Sometimes the actor might really want to do the project. And the agent might go, yeah, it's really good. I know you really want to do it. But right now, we're trying to push your career over here. This doesn't really fit into that idea. So, you know, there's a lot of politics, just like everything. You know, there's a lot of, you know, fighting between. And then sometimes, let's say, as an example, let's say you know the actor because you're friends with them. So you send them script directly. The agent calls you, why are you sending my actor script directly? But then they really want to do it. And they go, we're just going to do it anyway because I love it and I'm going to do it. And so the agent's job is to figure out how to make that happen for you. It happens too. I think getting great scripts is the hardest thing. I think getting great directors is probably the second hardest thing. I think getting great actors is the third hardest thing. But they're all pretty hard, you know? And the process of putting these things together is like really difficult. Now, the agencies also do this other stuff called packaging, which is where their job, which is what they do a lot of the time, is to take writers that they represent inside the agency, with directors they represent inside the agency, with actors they represent inside the agency, and put a movie together. And take that movie out to the town and say, who wants to buy this? Studio, independent guys, you know, whatever. Who wants to come finance this movie? They're kind of acting as producers in a way, even though they're not allowed to produce, right? So, now that can be a really good thing, can be a really bad thing, you know, but it happens, and there's a lot of people that get a lot of movies done that way. Again, sometimes this isn't the best thing for the industry because maybe it's not the best version of the movie, you know? It's convenient, it makes sense, but you know, agents are amazing, and some of them are amazing creatively, and some of them are not amazing creatively. So it really depends. Sometimes packages make a lot of sense, sometimes they don't. You guys have probably seen these movies where you go and you look at the movie and you're like, why did they cast those people, you know? Sometimes that happens. I don't know. So I think the process in our side is not any different really than probably the process here is my guess, you know? I don't know too much about the agency management world here, but maybe you guys can tell me. But I think that in general, you know, putting these movies together is something that we try very hard to do. It takes a very long time. I have a movie that I'm making right now that I had a director for a while. It took about 6 months to get the actor I wanted. I got the actor I wanted, which was very lucky. And the director called me like 3 weeks after I got the actor, and he said he had something kind of happen in his family. And he called me and he said, I'm really sorry, I can't do the movie. And I said, okay, I understood, because I mean, you can't say anything, and it made a lot of sense to me. So, you know, a year later, you had a great director for a year, or for 6 months. Then you had a great director and a great actor for about a month as you went to try to make your movie. And then you realized you have no director again for another 6 months. So that's just the process. I know you guys go through the same things, and you know, I think it's just, you know, with us, it's more about when you're making larger budgets with bigger actors, there's only so many guys, and we talk about this all the time. I think I had this conversation with someone the other day, which is, at a certain budget level, there's a value that's created by the talent you're attaching to your movie, right? And it's hard to put a value on people, which feels kind of weird, but in actuality, it kind of does happen. You know, your package creates an inherent value to it, which is a dollar amount. And so when you're going to make your movie at a certain budget level, there are really maybe only X amount of people that exist in Hollywood, in the international film stage, that fulfill those criteria. So as an example, if you're making a movie at $50 million, like there's probably only about like 15 guys and 15 girls in the whole world that sort of check those boxes in terms of fulfilling those financial criteria to make it, which is why you see the same 15 guys and 15 girls in every movie that you see, basically, right? And those people are very busy, and they get a lot of offers, like literally a lot, like probably they're probably getting offers, 5 offers a week, if not more, for millions and millions of dollars. So your script better be really, really good, basically. That's what I'm trying to say. So this process can be fun too, to be honest. The more interested the town is in your script or in your idea, the more fun the process becomes. Because more people they want to get involved, the more people are interested, and it just becomes this great, amazing thing. I'll go back to something else, which is, I love my job. Like, I really do. And I think you have to. I think if you're in this business and you're interested in doing it, you better love it. There's a lot better ways to make money. There's probably a lot better ways to do a lot of things. And it takes a lot of time, and it's super frustrating, and it's really stressful, and it's, you know, all these things. But when I worked at a company, and now I don't, but I love going to work on Monday morning. And I don't think there's a lot of people that can say that. And I think we all have to, like, take a step back and realize, like, this industry's awesome, you know? Like, it's great. And it's really hard, and that's what makes it great. If it was super easy, everyone would do it. And if it's super easy, everyone would be successful at doing it, and then it wouldn't be so great. So I think you have to kind of like live and love the turmoil and live and love the trials and tribulations of it. And hopefully that kind of just pushes you to kind of keep going. I think it's fun. Second thing I'll say, and this is just me kind of talking off the cuff, which is, when you make these movies, like, making intellectual property, whether you write books, whether you write scripts, whether you make movies or television, whether you make things that actually aren't like physical objects, they last forever, right? It's this weird idea of immortality. Like, when you make a movie, everything that you make is going to last forever. As long as there's human society with information storage in some form or another, every single thing you make is going to last forever. They told me they're live streaming this on YouTube, and then they're going to post it after. That's going to be on there forever. But seriously, like with the movies, when I think about stuff, and when I think about starting a project, I think, is this something that I want to last forever? This is your legacy. Like, we don't have resumes, really. We have credits. So your career is dictated by the movies you make. We all have horrible movies. I've made a lot of really bad movies, and that's okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you learn, hopefully, from each one of those, and you try to do better. So for me, you know, this idea of immortality, this idea of the types of projects we make, again, when you're in that first stage of figuring out what you want to do, like, you know, like, let that sort of reference it for you. Like, you know, okay, is this something that I really want to spend 3 years of my life on or more? Is this something I really want to, you know, have out there forever that people are always going to look back and say, oh, you're the guy who did that? Maybe it is, maybe not. Again, it goes back to, like, why are you making it? Maybe you need to make some money. That's okay. We all have to pay our bills. And so sometimes you maybe do movies or things or jobs that you are not necessarily like, oh, this is the greatest idea in the world. And that's fine too. Because again, we all need to make a living. Me too. So I don't know. When I think about putting these movies together, you know, we try to just think about all these different steps, all these different ideas, and especially in Los Angeles and in the international world, how these different pieces come together and how difficult they are. That's okay. It's okay that we struggle with them, and when it works, it's really, really fulfilling, I think. And that's kind of what we all kind of strive for, is for making that work. So, any questions there? I don't know if that was kind of just rambling and kind of lame, but I was trying to say something there. I'm not sure exactly what it was. So, okay. No questions.
I've got a question with regards to the collaborative process.
Mm-hmm.
I see there you've got producers, directors, talent, and representatives, and you don't really have writers. What is your process of working with a writer? You spoke a little bit about working with Nacho. Was it Nacho you mentioned?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And as I was sitting up here talking, I was like, I can't believe I didn't write writers on this slide.
Yeah, that's where it starts.
You are 100% right. That is exactly where it starts. Writers are great, and I love them. No, but seriously, like, I mean, you know, one thing I realized, like, about my own skill set is I'm not a very good writer. Meaning, like, I feel like I'm pretty good coming up with ideas. I feel like I'm pretty good critic, you know? I feel like I'm pretty good at picking holes, looking at gaps, understanding processes and mentalities of people and characters. I'm pretty good at a lot of that, maybe, hopefully. I'm not really amazing at filling in all the details. And that's something that I depend on the writers I work with to do a great job for. They are, again, I think, which is, you know, too bad. I should probably put directors and writers is probably what I should have put, but there you go. That's my mistake. I think that I love the collaborative process of starting out a project with a writer. I think it's really fun, you know. I recently went to China with a writer to work on a movie, and we went to do script research. That was it. We spent 3 days in China just to do research for the script we were doing, which we were lucky enough to have somebody pay for and fly us out there to do. And we just hung out for 3 days just to figure out what it was like. And then we came home, and we talked a lot about the project, and he went out, came back, gave me a really nice outline, which we then talked about more, and now he's off writing the movie. And I think that, again, the collaborative process with the writer is much like the collaborative process with the director, meaning you have to be open to those ideas from both sides. I think that people are going to come up with things that you're never going to think about, which is really great, which is why you do movies in groups of people. And taking those ideas, whether they're from writers or whether they're from other producers or the filmmaker itself, is really important. A lot of my career was spent getting finished scripts already, which is probably the reason why I probably left it out. And now that I don't do that as much, and I end up hiring a lot of writers lately to do stuff, I've actually found it to be even more important. You know, we do a lot of rewriting on stuff. Like, we always get scripts, and the thing about rewriting is that everyone is gonna have, you're never gonna get a script, ever, as a writer, and you're never gonna send your script to a director or producer, and they're gonna say, this is great, I don't wanna change one single word in this script. That never happens. I'm sure there's some writers in here, and you're like, of course, that's crazy, because that will never, ever happen. Everyone wants to put a little bit of their own imprint on things. I don't think it's because they feel like they need to do it. I feel like they genuinely think, like, oh, I think I can make it better. Sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes we rewrite stuff and we realize, wow, like, we have gotten so far off track. This is just, you know, you kind of like go down the rabbit hole, and sometimes you need to take a step back. And, you know, a lot of the time when I'm doing, like, I have a movie right now at a studio that we've been developing, and I think I'm on like the 3rd draft. And I read it the last time, and I said to myself, we have lost something here. Like, there's something about this that really isn't special anymore. And so I went back and I read the 1st draft, which I think is always really important, because it's good to go remind yourself why you liked something in the first place. I think that's really important. And try to identify what those things are and maybe bring it back into the project. Because you start going like, well, we're going to change this character because they need to be more active, and we're going to do this because, you know, we're doing that, and this part of the plot doesn't really work, so we're going to, you know, reset this somewhere else. And then you do all these things that all seem like really great ideas at once. And I see someone with a question over there, so yeah. But you do all these things that seem like great ideas, and everybody agrees. The writer agrees, and the director agrees, and the producer agrees, and then you all read the script, and you kind of go, well, you did everything we talked about, but we all don't really like the script as much, you know? So it's good to go back and identify what those things are. So anyway, to your question about the collaborative process, I think, you know, it works the same here, I'm sure, as it does everywhere else. Again, maybe the only difference is ego. You know, the more you kind of get along with people that are getting paid lots and lots of money to do stuff, the more they kind of feel like they're right all the time. But again, I think the best collaborators, regardless of how successful they are or how famous they are, and I think a lot of the most successful people are really good collaborators, and that's why they've become so successful. So anyway, Sorry.
You say you think it works like that here? No, it doesn't. Oh, no, it don't. Sorry, my English. I belong to the Writers Guild of South Africa, but I earn my living as a film lecturer because I couldn't earn my living as a writer. I worked on a film project. The producer told me we have very big cast involved. We really did have a big director, big producer. They told me, Anne-Marie, we're going to pay you once this film make a lot of money. But then when the budget came, I know you don't know South African worth of money, but you can think they budgeted 150,000 rand for the DOP, the director of photography. They paid the cast, they paid everything. In the end, 60,000 rand was left for the writers. We were 2 writers working on the script for 2 years. We each got 30,000 rand for the script. I get to this festival every year and people talk about, oh, we don't have good scripts, we don't have good writers. Sorry, that's bullshit. Our producers, sorry, I love all of you in my capacity as a journalist, you budget for the writer like 1/5 of the money that you're going to pay the DOP, that you pay, that films 3 weeks on the film. You're paying the writer for 2 years. I just spoke to a producer now and that's told me, Anne-Marie, I want you to write me a script. Can you please give me a draft in a month's time? He didn't even talk money. He's just expecting me to quit my job and quickly write the script.
Anne-Marie, is there a question?
Yes, so my question is, what would your advice be to the South African producers and the South African industry sitting here in terms of writing?
Well, it's a good question. I'm going to be very honest with you, which is as much as we all like to sit around and think that, you know, everyone's going to be fair to everyone else, it's not true. We have guilds in the US that deal with these things because we provide a minimum amount that anyone gets to get paid for doing anything, right? Now, as a producer, sometimes this is difficult to deal with. As a writer, I think it provides a minimum basis. But, you know, I found this in a lot of places around the world. Writers don't get paid very much, and so they don't spend a lot of time writing, and so there isn't a lot of potentially great material out there because it's not being generated because no one's paying them to do it, right? So whereas in the US, writers actually, I mean, not get paid a lot, but, you know, get paid a lot more than 30,000 rand to write a script for 2 years. My advice, that's a good question. I mean, I could sit here and say, like, well, everybody should pay everybody fairly for the work they do. But, you know, sadly, like, that's never going to happen because, you know, we're always trying to cut corners and we're always trying to save money and we're always trying to do that. And, you know, people shouldn't get necessarily paid fairly all the time. They just don't. I don't know, it's a really hard question, to be honest. I mean, I would say, you know, y'all should get together and create a minimum amount you're all going to get paid and not work unless you get paid more than that. But then I'd be, you know, up here kind of promoting the idea that, you know, other things. I'm just not going to get into it too much. So.
Another question.
I have a question. Hello. I have a question. You spoke a bit about the two kind of ways of like someone approaching you with an idea versus just creating an idea yourself and going with that. So I have a question, I guess, from both sides. At what point financially do you get someone on board? And can you speak a bit about the balance between selling an already made thing, or at what stage do you consider an idea sellable, or selling something that you're going to make? And on the flip side, how do you buy? At what stage do you buy something that's already made, or at what stage should it already have been made, or someone approaching you and selling something to you that they're going to make? Can you speak about about the balance?
No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I think it's different for different people. So, for example, if you are a writer that has sold a lot of scripts, shows to studios and people like that, you can literally walk into a studio and you can say, here's this great idea, and pitch it. And they'll be like, We're going to buy that for $100,000. Go write it. That's it. It can be that simple, which is totally crazy to me. That comes from your past performance, though. You know, like, nobody's going to do that if you've never sold anything to them before, if you've never written anything, if you've never set up stuff. I think that the more you can put together yourself, the more value you have to sell it later. The earlier you sell it, the more you give away. That's just the general process. So for instance, if you have a great script that you've developed with a writer and you set it up at a movie studio in the United States, they'll pay the writer for the project, they'll pay you as a producer maybe a small development fee, and you'll work on that project, but you won't own it, and you'll lose most of the control over it. Now that's fine because, you know, maybe you make a lot of money later, and maybe the movie becomes a giant 3,000 print release in the US and gets released all over the world, and that's great, and that's why you kind of do those types of movies. But assuming that you have a great project and a great script, and then you go get a great filmmaker, now you have a lot more leverage because now you're in control of that. Now let's say you get a great filmmaker and a great actor. Now you have a whole package. Now you have a movie that you can make anywhere, that you're going to get a lot of people that are going to come and decide that they want to give you an offer for. So the further along your project is, the easier it is to sell it, is the truth, assuming that it's a package that people want to buy, obviously. The earlier it is, the less money you're going to get, the less likely it is probably to get made, to be honest, in some ways. And so, I mean, it's kind of a balance. It's like investing or something, you know. The greater the risk, you know, the more your potential return. The less the risk, the probably less your potential return is. I think it's kind of the same thing, you know. And I think you have to sort of make that determination based on the project itself and what makes the most sense. As an independent producer, I would say it's in your best interest generally to try to put as many pieces together as you can before you go off and try to sell that movie. If you can do that successfully, you are in a really good position, especially right now in the world, because there's a lot of people looking for a lot of content, especially good content. And there's a lot of outlets, and we'll get into that, and I think I have a slide later about sort of distribution and kind of what those outlets look like. There are a lot of outlets. If you sell something early, you end up stuck in what they call development hell a lot of the time. And sometimes those things just don't get made. You get too many cooks in the kitchen too early. You know, and again, you lose that sort of singular creative vision to kind of drive the project forward. So, does that answer your question? Great. Okay. Money. Do you guys want to talk about money? All right. So, this is going to go into the non-studio version of independent international filmmaking, which is what I did for a long time. And this is sort of a sample structure. Now, it's hard to make sense out of this, but each of these things sort of are the same, and this is sort of how they relate to each other. So I'll go through each one of those. The first one is what I call the finance plan. This is the plan which makes up 100% of the budget of any individual movie, right? This consists usually, now there's a million different ways to make movies, but we'll just do it in the sort of most generic, normal, international structuring way. Most movies consist of a debt piece, which is a bank loan in simple terms. A soft money piece, which is some sort of tax credit, rebate, or other types of free money that you don't have to pay back, which is the best type of money for all of us. An equity piece, which is a cash investment generally from an investor or a company or a fund or whatever. This is a piece that does get paid back, usually plus some sort of return, in return for some sort of ownership over the movie. The last piece I'll just call the deposit piece, because this is the amount that buyers actually give you up front that you can use towards making your movie. So it's a little less important. It kind of goes back into the sales piece, which is in the bottom. But so let's look at the debt piece, which is the debt loan. I'll go into, I have each one of these slides, so I actually should probably go into them individually, but I'll do that. Hold on. Let's see. All right, so the debt piece. The debt piece is usually made up of 2 pieces. I put 3 up here and I'll explain why, but generally it's really just 2. The first piece is what's called senior debt. Now, there are different names for this stuff, to be totally honest. Sometimes people call it different things. This is what I call it, and a lot of people call it what I call it, but the concept is the same if you hear people call it other things. But senior debt. Now, senior debt is a financial term. I am not a financial person, generally. I'm a movie person that does some movie finance stuff. But senior debt is basically the most senior level of debt. It's the first thing that gets basically taken over by the bank. Senior debt in international film finance is money that is lent against sales contracts that actually exist. So what does that mean? It means when you have a package and you put together your movie, and you've given it to a foreign sales agent, do you guys know what a foreign sales agent is? Yes, mostly? A foreign sales agent is someone who basically takes your movie, goes to markets, and shops it around just like a hot dog or anything like that, basically. They take your movie and they pitch it in a room to a bunch of buyers that show up and hopefully get them to buy your movie for the greatest amount of money possible in whatever territory those buyers are coming from. Anyway, so when you make a contract, because you pre-sell that movie before the movie is made, you have an actual contract for an actual amount of money with an actual reputable buyer who has some sort of value that a bank can ascertain, and they lend you real money against that piece of paper. Now, how do they do that? Well, it depends on the buyer. You know, if some random guy from some random country in a place they've never heard of, with a buyer they've never heard of, well, the bank's probably not going to lend you money against that person, right? If it's from a giant company that's backed by a giant government, then they probably will, generally. So that's the senior piece. The gap piece. People hear about gap loans all the time and stuff like this. The gap piece is a piece that's created by the value of the foreign sales company. And what I mean by that is the foreign sales company gives you a list of how much they think you're going to sell your movie for, broken down by territory. They sell a certain number of those territories before you make your movie. For those territories, the bank will give you a lot of money for those contracts, which we just talked about, senior piece, usually about 90% of the value of that contract. For all the rest of the unsold territories in the rest of the world, we call this the gap piece. The bank will lend you approximately 50% of the value of the unsold territories. Now, this is a crazy idea, by the way. Like, let's just think about this for a second. A foreign sales company says, I'm going to, in the future, at some point, sell $10 million worth of this movie to all these territories who decided not to pre-buy the movie in the first place. And the bank says, great, I'm going to give you $5 million. This is the sort of weird secret of financing film, is we leverage money. We leverage a very little amount of money into a very lot amount of money to make movies. Why do the banks do this? Well, they do it based on the reputation of the foreign sales agent, which makes a difference for which foreign sales agent you're going to choose, hopefully, when you have your really great project that they're all fighting over. There are about 15 to 20 foreign sales agents in the world that banks will loan gap against, and that's it, usually, depending on the bank. So you have to be selective with that, and what we call those are bankable foreign sales agents. If you've ever heard that term before, that's what that means. The last piece is something you probably don't need to know so much about, but I just put it up here because it's kind of interesting, which is this. Mezzanine. Now, when a bank has loaned the senior piece and discounted it by 90%, and they loan the gap piece and discounted it by 50%, there's actually a potential value of that 10% and that remaining 50% that exists. It's a value that should be paid at some point if those contracts are actually sold and paid. So there is an ability to actually raise more money inside of this thing. It's super risky because that person's sitting behind the senior debt lender and the gap lender, but there is a version of, like, you can actually grab a little bit more cash if you need it inside of this piece if you can find the right people to do it. Not many people do it because it's pretty risky, and you kind of you might end up losing money a lot of the time, but anyway. So I just put it in there. All right, I don't know if that was a good explanation. Are there questions? I see one back there in the way back. This is the boring part, and everybody's like, oh my God, I can't believe I got up so early for this.
Hi, my name's Conrad. I was just wondering, this debt structuring, do you typically do this on individual projects? Probably as an independent filmmaker you do, or do you finance slates as well? Because you were talking about risk around that mezzanine financing. Surely you can mitigate that on a slate.
What I'm talking about here is individual movies, but yes, you could do this in the same way for a slate of movies. However, across a slate of movies, if you're going to do it this way, they basically just take all the movies, they do this with them, and they add it together, and then they do it. You know what I mean? It's sort of the same thing at the end of the day, unless you have a revolving debt fund, which we can get into, but that's like really, then you're like, okay, now I'm going to make 20 movies. I don't really know what they are. You're going to give me a bunch of money because I've made a bunch of movies in the past, and blah blah blah. And now it's a different kind of idea. But what I'm talking about here is a good question. Is this is sort of like you're making your one movie, and this is how we do it generally, right, in the world. So, all right. Any more questions about debt lending and bank loans? You were thinking, I really want to get up at 9 o'clock in the morning after I stayed up drinking last night to learn about bank loans. Anyway. All right, soft money, the money we all love, and the money that apparently finances a lot of the stuff that's going on here, which is great. Soft money is amazing. We try to maximize it no matter what we do. Soft money comes in the form of tax credits, comes in the form of cash rebates, comes in the form of in-kind investment, which is also considered a form of soft money. So I'll go through each one of those. I didn't put in-kind investment up here, but it is. So first of all, we'll talk about tax credits, because most people think tax credits. No matter where I go in the world, I want tax credits. Tax credits are great. We have them in the US for individual states. We have them in different countries around the world, depending on what it is. Tax credits come in two forms. They come in forms called transferable and non-transferable tax credits. Non-transferable tax credits means that if you are a company producing the movie, you get a tax credit that you have to use later. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, unless you're a really big company that has a lot of tax liability and wherever you live, you might not actually be able to use that tax credit, meaning it's probably not very valuable to you, right? Now, if you're Warner Brothers and you make a lot of money and you go to some place that has a tax credit and you get that tax credit, then you can use it because you make a lot of money and you pay less taxes. That's the same thing as somebody giving you a check. Now, if you're a small independent company and you set up your company to make one movie, like we mostly do, you're probably not going to generate enough revenue on that to be able to utilize that tax credit later. So that tax credit becomes useless to you, which means it's not valuable at all. So then they created what's called transferable tax credits. Now, transferable tax credits allow you to take that credit that your company has earned and give it to somebody else. Generally, you sell it at a discount, usually. So let's say you live in, I don't know, Connecticut in the United States. You guys know where that is? It's a small state on the eastern coast. Now, Connecticut has a lot of pharmaceutical companies, as an example. Or you live in Louisiana, which has a lot of oil companies. They all want tax credits, right? Because that means they get to pay the government less money at the end of the year. So you make your little movie, you get a $1 million tax credit, and you sell it off to some big pharma company for 90 cents on the dollar, right? Which means you only get 90% of the value of your tax credit, but that company just saved 10% on $1 million. It's great for them. It's pretty good for you. So kind of everybody wins, so to speak. Now, banks will lend against this, which is really great. So again, it forms another piece of that whole debt loan that we talked about in the first place. I'm going to go back to that slide at some point. And that means that if a bank knows that you can get 90% of the value of a transferable tax credit, they'll give you 90% of that, right? So now you're getting something like 80-something% of the value of your tax credit that you can use in cash to go and make your movie. So that's it. Cash rebates are exactly that. Somebody writes you a check. This is the best version of it, usually. Now, you can lend against these also, because sometimes they don't write your check until after your movie, and you need the money now, because you got to make your movie now. So banks will lend to get that. Maybe 90% to get that. Same thing, right? So anyway, that's kind of how this works. Soft money, we like it. And the last thing is in-kind investment, which is things like a post-production company, a VFX company that decide to give you services for free in return for maybe an ownership stake in the movie, something like that. An in-kind investment allows you to reduce your budget, which means you're spending less money, which means you have to raise less money, so that's a good thing in return for some sort of something. maybe a promise to do work with them later. I mean, there's lots of different reasons why they might do it. But we also consider that what I call a form of soft money. You can't lend against that form of soft money. So, equity, this is pretty easy. It's just cash. You find it from rich people, you find it from companies, you find it from funds, and usually the equity piece is the piece that you need, which is determined by how much money you can get from the other things, because you generally want to give away as little equity as possible, because the less equity you give away, the more you own the movie, if it's your movie that you're making, and the more you have to be able to give to other people involved in making the movie. We generally split movie down the middle, with one half of the movie being given to the finance people, called the finance share, and the other half being called, well, it's really called the producer share, but it's really for the creatives. So it's for the producers, for the writers, for the directors. Now, just like anything in this business or any business, everything is negotiable, and if you're getting very little equity from someone, you might say, well, I'm not going to give you half the movie for that little amount of equity, as an example. I'm only going to give you a quarter of the movie, or I'm only going to give you a third of the movie. Oh, did I hit something? Oh, there it is. So generally the rule is, if you finance 100% of the movie, or 100% of the equity on the movie, you get 50% of the movie. If you finance 25%, so you just get half of whatever you put up, generally. Now, again, that's all negotiable. So, you know, as a producer or as a producer-director or coming and starting out, when you are going to look for money from somebody, you can have this conversation, but the industry standard is you pretty much get half the movie for 100% of the equity. And you can work your way from there. So, now sales, which we'll get into. So, sales come in two forms. I kind of talked about it earlier: pre-sales and unsold estimates, which make up the senior and gap portion of the debt loan. International pre-sales are done by international sales agents, usually at markets, sometimes not at markets, by calling all of their contacts and saying, do you want to buy this movie? It's a pretty simple process. It gets pretty complicated in terms of the paperwork and the back end of it, but in terms of the front end of it, it's really simple. Do you want to buy this? Yes. Okay. How much? Okay. Done. There's terms, there's timelines, there's all these other things, there's windows, there's back ends, there's splits of the various, what's the word I'm losing? But anyway, on the various forms of distribution. What am I talking about? Whether it's theatrical, or video, VOD, TV, splits are all different, et cetera. I'll keep hitting this button, sorry. So that makes up that. So then I go back to this slide, which is the slide I had in the first place, which hopefully now gives you an idea of how these things relate to each other. I try to line everything up so that you can kind of understand. So inside of the debt loan here, which in this particular case makes up 54% of the budget, you see that it has 33% as a senior loan, 21% as a gap. I'm not using MES. The bank loan on the next one under the cash flow, which is basically how the movie is actually going to be paid for rather than the total financial structure. The bank loan here includes the debt piece plus the soft money piece, because assuming you're financing the tax credit, let's call it, in this particular scenario, plus the equity plus the original deposits, which are 10% of whatever pre-sales there are. And then how the pre-sale numbers here relate to that. You don't really need to know these numbers, but this is just sort of like a general setup of how you would do this. Again, like I would say 90% of every movie that's made on the international world is made by doing this, right? 10% are probably made by just paying cash, which if you're lucky enough to figure that out is really nice, but that doesn't happen that often. So, all right, that was probably really boring, maybe. Does anybody have questions about this?
I just have a small question on the soft costs. What are the portions between those tax credits, the transferable and non-transferable, and the rebate? That 18%, how is that 18% split between those three things? Is it mostly transferable tax credits that make up the 18%?
It's one or the other, meaning the 18% is entirely one or the other. Like a tax credit is either transferable or non-transferable, or it's a rebate. It's one of those three things. So I just use the 18% as a percentage of budget because, like a lot of states, let's say, have, or a lot of countries have, let's say, a 25% credit, as an example, right? So I used 18% because by the time you get the bank loan, and by the time you get the transfer, and by the time you discount all of those things, you're probably getting closer to 20%, sometimes less. So like when you say you're getting 25% credit on your movie, you're not actually getting 25%. Let's just all be honest, like that never happens. And then usually that 25% is based on some sort of actual spend, let's say in-state spend or in-country spend or approved spend. So like, for example, in some jurisdictions, you get tax credits on your actors' fees, whether they live in that country or not. Maybe they just have to pay taxes, which is fine. And in some countries, you don't. Now, depending on the movie you have, half your budget could be, could be your actor fees. So assuming half your budget's your actor fees, you're getting 25% on your, approved spend that doesn't include actors. Well, now your actual rebate is closer to 12.5, right? So it just depends. The reason why I put 18 is because it's just sort of like a general good sort of number that's pretty accurate in a lot of places in the world. There's very few places that are giving you 40%, and there's very few places that are, maybe there's more that are giving you 5%, but most people don't go shoot there because it's not worth it, or it's much harder to make your movie that way. So, but good question.
Hi, Zef, I'm Yolanda. So I just want to ask, in terms of your low-budget films, would you still use the same model, or would it be, what would be amended, what would be different?
That's also a really good question. The lower the budget, the more likely you're just going to pay for it or find somebody to pay for it, because the costs of doing this, there are inherent costs in doing all of this, right? There are bank fees, there's all these discounts. Like, you're losing money during this process, right? At the end of the day, but you're losing money in order to move the value up front so that you can have the money to make the movie in the first place. I mean, the interesting thing about this is that if you have a $10 million movie, right, that we're looking at here, you only need $2.1 million to make it, which is pretty interesting. I mean, I think that's interesting, right? You need, like, generally, you're leveraging $2 million into 10. That's great, And so when you think about how you're going to make these movies and you understand what the budgets are, you understand, again, going back to the first slide of how you make the movie, you go, okay, well, I have a $20 million movie. I'm going to need about $4 million, $5 million in equity, depending on what it is, and do that. And to your question, which is really relevant, which is like, let's say I'm making a $1 million movie, right? Generally, the costs involved in doing all of this are either too high and it starts to not make sense, or the people involved in wanting to do this don't want to spend the time to do a $300,000 loan, right? It's not worth their time and effort. They don't make enough money off it, because the truth is, much like making any size movie, making a $1 million movie is just as hard as making a $100 million movie, and takes just as much time, and takes just, well, maybe not just as many people, but generally, like, a lot of those things are very similar. The potential to make more money with a bigger budget movie is higher, generally. Not always true, but in general. And so if you're a bank, you want to make more money, you want to do bigger bank loans. And so a lot of them are not going to be as incentivized to do this type of structure with the lower the budget becomes. So what do? Well, there's sometimes a lot more, let's say, there's private investors, which might come to you and say, hey, is that my time left? Probably, right? Okay, wow, it goes quick. A lot of those people will say, hey, I'm going to finance your whole movie, right? And they're going to split up their loan. They're going to say, like, they're going to be a private, not a bank, like a bank that's run by, some sort of national thing, or, a bank that makes housing loans and other kind of banks. They're just basically a private investor that says, I'm going to give you a little bit of equity. I'm going to make this much is going to be your debt piece. This much is going to be this, and I'm going to split up the whole thing, and I'm going to do it like that. That's more likely. Or you just find somebody to write you a check, which is harder, but happens all the time. And depending on how, and the lower the budget goes, the easier it is to do that, generally. So you kind of hit like this middle space, maybe. I think it's probably in the sort of $3.5 to $5 million range, where it kind of goes from finding the money and doing it in an all-private way to doing it in sort of this sort of structure. Generally, I find it's like around that sort of budget level that changeover happens. So, but really good question. Yes.
can I just go back to away from the finance because this is a bit over my head. I just wanted to ask you: is there a threshold that you experience for independent movies of the USA type independent movies that are much bigger than ours, obviously, where there's a threshold where it becomes viable to actually to travel the world? Or is it just the big tentpole things that you kind of rely on China for and all the other big markets? Is there a space to occupy there where movies can kind of...
Well, I mean, one of the things I haven't really touched on very much is like, how are you getting your movies, like what's the type of movies that you need to make to go and push into the rest of the world, right? Yeah. Which is the question you're asking. Which I sort of think I'm done with finance piece. This is my production slide because I'm not actually going to talk about it. It's just production. That's it. That's what happens. You make the movie. Anyway. But to your question, the international market looks for types of movies that everyone can relate to, right? You know, like one of the things about this festival, and I'll say this about young filmmakers in general, everywhere in the world, and I've probably talked to some of you about this, is you tend to focus on the things you know, right? It's comfortable. And in a place like this, and I kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, the financial structure that's created by, you know, some of the soft money, you know, access that you have here in South Africa also pushes you into making certain types of movies, right? So you go, okay, I want to get my movie made. How am I going to get this money? Okay, I can get 400 grand by grabbing some from this agency and some from this agency, but that requires me to make a culturally South African movie, and I'm going to do this, so that's going to make me make this kind of movie, and there I am. So now you've made this kind of movie. Now that kind of movie doesn't necessarily say, go and travel well. And then I'm going to start saying things here that might be controversial. So the second thing is English. We're at an Afrikaanse film festival, but I will tell you right now, if you want to make a movie that travels much easier, you should make it in English, just in general. It's just the way it is. Now, I've talked to a few of you and you've said to me things like, English movies don't work here unless they're foreign. And I'd say to you, you're not making your movie for here. You're making your movie for the rest of the world, which will come back here also, because people won't know it's necessarily a South African movie, because it's not necessarily about that. As a writer, as a director, as a filmmaker, as a producer, your job is to tell great stories. Sometimes those are great South African stories, sometimes those are great other stories, it doesn't matter. You should not limit yourself to making movies about here, right? Just because you're from here. Making movies about things you know is really important, but if you're a great creative, you should be able to make a movie about anything. You do some research, you walk around the world, you talk to people, you go places, you know what I mean? There's no reason why any person in here shouldn't be able to write a sitcom about being a producer in Hollywood. Makes no difference, you know what I mean? And so I think like when you start, to your question, you know, it's trying to get these types of movies to travel, or trying to get any type of movie to travel, you have to think about your audience. Again, who you're making the movie for, you know?
Something like Dallas Buyers Club was, sorry, it's still me.
Yeah, sorry.
What was your second biggest market for that? What did it end up being after America?
You know, there's two things I'll say about Dallas, and it's not the easiest things to hear, but the first one is it was a great script, really great, you know? They've been trying to make that movie for over 10 years. And it was really great, and it was really not commercial. Really, really not commercial. And when we decided to do that movie, it was the third time it had been offered to us, maybe the fourth. And the first time they came to offer it to us, they asked us for $15 million to make the movie, and we said no. And then they came back to us and offered us $10 million to make the movie, and we said no. And then they came back and said, would you make it for $7 million? And we said no. And then they said, how much would you make the movie for? And we said 5. Because 5 was the amount of money that the movie made sense to be made for, right? They ended up making the movie for about $5.6 million. We ended up bringing another financier. And it became a much more profitable movie than that. But none of us knew that at the time, because at the end of the day, making a movie like that is not a movie that a large amount of people are going to potentially go see when you're from the beginning, right? Like, like that's the idea. It's not a big commercial concept. It's not broad. It's dramatic. It's small. It's, I mean, like on top of it, on top of, you know, the idea of AIDS, of sexuality, of all these things, it's like about a cowboy, which no one cares about, in the middle of the country in the United States. Like it just isn't a movie that's made for the international market in any way. It like doesn't check like most of the boxes. You know what I mean? So what do you do when you make a movie like that? You make it for as small a budget as you can and hope that that you don't lose a bunch of money on it. We got lucky. I mean, it was a good movie, and sometimes good movies, you know, come to the forefront of things. But at the end of the day, like, that's that. Now, if I was a betting person, and I wanted to make a movie that was going to be distributed around the world, that's not the kind of movie I'd make, you know? Let's just be honest. But, you know, also, depending on your situation, depending on where you work, depending on the companies, you know, you have the ability to take risks because maybe you have a bunch of other movies that are much more secure, maybe you have income coming from other places. It allows you to do different things. Now, the great part about being an independent filmmaker and not working at one of those companies is you have all the ability in the world to take risks. You only have upside, right? You just have to get somebody to believe in you, what you're doing. So, because you're not the ones writing the checks, right? Generally. So, I mean, I think that this is my last slide, by the way, so I'm not that far off, right? We have to think about that. Going back to this idea of English, and I'll point this out to you guys, since I'm sitting up here talking to you in English, you have a distinct advantage to most of the rest of the world, along with a few other countries, namely Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia, is that you all speak English. This is huge. Like, let me just make that a big point. This is huge. You don't have to go and learn a new language to access the idea of the easiest language in the world to make movies with that go and are distributed worldwide. I don't know why this is. I don't necessarily think it's a good thing, but the fact of the matter is most cultures around the world are more easily accepting of English language movies that they will go watch with subtitles or that are dubbed than other types of movies from other places. Maybe it's because of the Hollywood thing, maybe it's because of something else. Question? And then we should probably do a Q&A. I'll go through this slide really, really fast, and then I'm gonna bring Johan Kruger to talk about a few other things, I think.
Hi, Zev, it's Antoinette. Just a question regarding English. People are not used to the South African English accent. Do you think we can go, you know, with this South African English?
Depends. You know what I mean? I think that it depends on the movie, and it depends on your actors. I mean, as a writer or a director, it makes no difference, right? You know, a script doesn't have an accent. As from a perspective of an actor, I think the world's a pretty broad place. And if I'm really honest, I think most people probably can't tell the difference between a South African accent and maybe Australian or even British for that matter in most of the world, right? So I don't really think it makes a big difference at all is the truth. And, you know, I think most actors have the ability to modulate their accent a bit here and there to sort of get it to be acceptable depending on what the role is, you know? And that's gonna be dependent on the script. Again, I'm not necessarily talking about projects that are set here. They can be set anywhere, about anything. So, anyway. I can go through this last one quickly. Are we still gonna do, we can do Q&A? Yeah? Yeah, okay, great. All right, distribution. I'll just do this very, very quickly, which is this. The last stage of putting your movie together. Who is going to buy your movie and who is going to put it out? In the US, we have the major studios, which you all have heard of because they all put out movies all over the world. I don't really need to explain much how that works. It's big, big, big most of the time, or super commercial most of the time. They're not really looking for small indie dramas. They're just not. That's not the way the world works anymore. The mini majors, which are sort of the smaller versions of the big studios, trying to emulate them for the most part, but are a little bit more open to other types of things. These are the sort of Lionsgates, Open Roads, STXs of the world that are still have sort of universal distribution. Lionsgate sells their movies foreign, so they basically are a big US distributor in Canada, and then they have a sales company that deals with the rest of it. And they're very good at it as well. Digital. We're all trying to figure this out, you know? I know it's happening here. You guys have Netflix. I watched some Netflix on my computer here to finish up my shows that I was watching, which is great. I found it over the last 5 years, that's becoming much more prevalent. Hulu's, Apple's making TV mostly now. They're not making movies yet, but I'm sure that will happen at some point. Amazon, blah, blah, blah. Now, how is this going to work? I personally could not, but someone could come up here and do an entire lecture on that, and it would probably be much more interesting than my version of it. But basically, the idea here is there's a lot of outlets for your movies right now. And those outlets are willing to take much more risks on certain other things, which is great. As a filmmaker, as an actor, as a producer, we live in a kind of a really interesting and unique time. Now, how long is this going to last? I have no idea. Maybe not that long. Because right now, there's a lot of these channels, and I don't know how they're all going to survive. But for the moment, right now, at this particular time, there's a lot of people that are looking for content. And they need to fill those channels, and they need to boost their subscriber bases, and they need to create more never-ending existing content. So as a content creator, if you can make compelling stories with compelling packages of people, you're in a really great spot. That's my opinion. I'm doing it. I'm trying to, as we all are. So to me, I think there's something really interesting about digital, and that's great. And then international, which is just what I talked about before, which is how these movies get distributed worldwide, and that sort of thing. So that is that's mostly it. The last slide, I have another picture of LA, and I'd say this, and this is kind of cliche, but it's just not easy. I mean, nothing about this is easy. It is hard. It is difficult. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of energy, and that's okay. But we like it, and we love it, and we do it because we love it. So that's pretty much that.
Okay. Thank you for that, Zeph. Insightful, eye-opening to a very large extent. I think you've covered most of the basic questions that us as South African film producers has, irrespective of the language that we produce our films in. One of the questions I think that I get asked a lot is, we travel the world trying to sell our concepts, our pictures. How do we get to a guy like you? You're never at the stalls, you're never accessible, you hide. You're not on Twitter, you're not on Facebook. By the way, for a small nominal fee, I'll sell his contact details to you directly. Meet me in the car park. How do we get access to people like you, who's open-minded and who takes the risks? How do we get access to you? And then obviously through you, access to foreign talent or distributors or agents or managers and so on?
I mean, I think, it's like any business. You just have to meet people, You sort of have to pound the pavement, go to festivals, talk to people, make phone calls. It's not easy. I mean, that's the truth. It's hard. Hopefully you find one person here that can connect you to another person, connect you to another person. There's also a really thriving international production community here in South Africa, I mean, on my last movie I did in Ireland, had South African crew. So for me, I think there's a lot of people who live here too, who have access to some of those people already. But again, I think film markets are great places to meet these kind of people. Yeah, they're not in the stalls, but you walk around, talk to people. You'll find them eventually, I think. Cold calls are harder, but it's possible, depending on how things work. There's a lot of producers in Hollywood that are, again, looking for great material, as people are talking about all the time. You never know. You call up somebody who you respect, who you think is interesting, say, hey, I have a really great script. I understand you guys don't normally do this. Here, my lawyer's going to send it to you. I mean, it happens. We read a lot of stuff. I read a lot of stuff because, again, we're just looking for good things. So I do think it's hard, and I think it's a really good question. But, at the end of the day, I think you just have to do your networking, create those relationships, and keep pushing on them. Some of that's going to require leaving here, if you can. And some of that is hopefully trying to connect with those people that are here that are kind of going out in the world, like yourself, Johan.
To you. I guess that's me. If there's maybe a last question from the audience. something specific? That's Uncle.
Hi, Zef, it's Yolanda again.
Hi,
So I just
Yolanda.
want to go back to your distribution slide. Where would film festivals enter into that kind of equation? And also, okay, so you listed all the different things, but is there like a strategy? Like, do you start with theatrical first, and then, you know what I mean? Do you go there, and then you only leave digital to last, or how do you work all of that? Plus also adding the whole festival kind of circuit and run and such.
Yeah, I mean, festivals are great ways, obviously, to get your projects seen around the world. I think they're great ways to connect with people. Everybody in Hollywood is always looking for great foreign films to snatch those filmmakers, producers out of, to go and make other movies. That's happens all the time. I get sent a lot of foreign movies to watch all the time. Be like, hey, well, this director might be great for this. Happens constantly. So in terms of festivals, you know, the more you can get your movie seen, the more likely it is somebody's going to pick it up and try to distribute it. But festivals, for me, are, you know, there's a difference in markets and festivals, even though they tend to occur at the same place at the same time. Festivals are about screening films and about awards. Markets are about selling movies, right? Some of those things kind of combine, but they are actually different. So when you say, like, getting your name out there is always going to help. Festivals are a great way to do that, you know, and they tend to be really receptive to different types of movies, unlike, you know, just calling up a buyer and asking them to spend a bunch of money on P&A and distributing your movie. A festival doesn't have to do that. You'll be in front of a lot of people to get write-ups, et cetera. Now, your second question was, it was the strategy. Yeah. I think that goes back to the first slide, which is who you're making your movie for, you know? Like, you should understand if you are making a theatrical movie or not. You know, you might get lucky, think you're not, and then actually do, but for the most part, I think you should have a pretty good idea of, again, what type of movie is this, who's it going to, and where is it going to be distributed? You know, like, that doesn't mean I'm only gonna make a movie for digital. That doesn't make sense. But like, you pretty much understand if you're making a movie that's gonna be distributed on a wide scale across the world, or whether you're making a movie that's not. I think that's a pretty good place to start. And both of those things are completely valid and really good in a lot of different ways. You know, but I think to myself, you know, we all want like big theatrical movies, right? I mean, that's kind of the idea. In this day and age, though, let's say, you know, you want to make money on your movie, might not be the best idea. You know, maybe digital's a better way to go. You know, you can go to Netflix now and make 25% on your budget if they pay for your movie. And now you just know you made 25% on your movie. That's pretty good. You know, you get to walk away, fight another day, and it works. So I think it sort of depends, you know, but you should have a pretty good idea of what you think you're after, and I think that kind of will allow you to decide where that movie is eventually going to go. But a lot of the time you don't have a choice, and that's the truth. Like, you finish your movie, you get it done, you're taking it out assuming you didn't sell it before to somebody, and it's like, hopefully somebody buys it. And if you're lucky enough to have that happen, then that's great. And if people are fighting over your movie, even better. But, you know, it's hard, as I said, so you do the best you can.
Thank you, Zef. Sorry, we have to wrap it up. I think there was a question and there was a question. If you don't mind, maybe just having a chat with Zef here in the foyer, you're welcome to. Thank you very much for being here. It's great to have you. Thank you.